to say that this past Tuesday, my daughter Nancy, fortunately for me, took me for a haircut. You notice my hair is cut. We then went to the bank. I had the CD in the bank that was renewed, and I needed the paperwork. I talked to the manager of Wells Fargo in Batesburg, South Carolina, and Nancy mentioned we were going to this air base, and I was going to speak. And when she mentioned Mars, I asked the officer at the bank, "Do you know what Mars is?" He says, "Oh, sure." Then I noticed he had a military haircut, and I said, "Are you military?" He was assigned to this, when he was in the Air Force, he was assigned here. I mean, those are the crazy things that happened to me. And with that, I'll start. I had an interest in aircraft starting in 1926. Did you ever hear of a barnstormer? Those were pilots, had a single engine plane, carried a passenger. He'd make an arrangement with the farmer to use some of his land for landing his plane. You paid him a small amount of money, and he would take off, fly around a couple of minutes, come back down, pick up another passenger, and that was the beginning of my, and I was 10 years old then. In 1936, many things happened during that year. Probably the most important thing, and I don't believe I've ever talked about it before, but the quartz crystal industry and research that I was involved with for 30 years at Fort Mortimer, New Jersey, needed a member of the group of experts on frequency control as part of NATO, because before World War II there was no standardization between the militaries of the different countries. NATO provided this ability for all the NATO nations to coordinate their things, even as low as the quartz crystals and radios. So I was sent to NATO in Paris at that time, and President Eisenhower added a line in the TDY forms that were used by the military, which said that any travel overseas would be by military aircraft if available. Well, it turned out McGuire Air Force Base is in southern Jersey. And sure enough, I flew out of an Air Force base to France on a C-54. It was a dependence flight. So, and it held all the seats from front to back. There was no galley. You paid $1 for a box lunch. And the plane got as far as the Azores, the Air Force base on the Portuguese island of Azores. It's about 1,000 miles off the European coast. Landed there to refuel and get a sandwich. and wound up not at the Paris airport, but at a small World War II Air Force base in France. Again, I had made reservations for a hotel in Paris, and I wound up by being instead an Air Force hotel in a remote part of Paris, which was, I had to learn how to use the underground. C-47 was a military version of the DC-3. We flew, when I got through with the NATO meeting, flew to London because British Post Office also did work with quartz crystals. So the C-47 flight over wasn't too bad. Got through with the work at the laboratory, the post office. Got back to that same airport and was sitting there waiting for it to take off. And an officer comes up to me and asks for my ID. I showed it to him. He hands me a revolver in an attaché case to take back to Paris. I was now a courier. The instructions were to sit in the back of the plane, get on the plane first, don't get off until a military officer shows you his ID, and he then takes the revolver. And but like I say, some of these things you may think just I make them up, but they're actually real things. The air races at the Buffalo airport, for a couple of years, they set up a pylon on the airport, and then two more to make a triangular flight route. And they had small one engine, one pilot. And they did air races at an altitude from 200 to 500 feet. So there was a stand, wooden temporary stand for people. There were about 10,000 people ready to watch this air race. And the control tower had no radio. They used a telescopic thing where the controller would look through the telescope at the cockpit of the plane, and he had three buttons, green, red, and yellow. And that's how they controlled these chickens there. That's how they controlled the aircraft. Well, here comes a really strange thing again. They got a DC-3, though the stands were parallel to the runway, but about 300 feet away. DC-3 gets the green light to take off, and while he's going down the runway, a Stinson comes out facing away from the airport, control tower. So there was no way to stop him. So the DC-3 did a turn like this, the wing hit the ground, and it did this thing. That was the greatest performance I ever saw. So the airport was closed down for a couple of weeks. When it reopened, it was announced they would then change to radio control and get rid of the telescopic sight thing. There was going to be a training session for new controllers that had FCC licenses. So I signed up for the course. It's held in the evening at high school. The instructor was the chief operator of the radio range FAA system with the four antennas and a square and then another antenna in the middle. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's called ADCOP, I think is the term. So when I'm finally going to tie it to teletype. One evening, the instructor said, I'm going to take the whole class over to the radio range transmitter and both explain how it works and show you the way the operators get the weather information. The weather information is sent over the middle tower in this ADCOP arrangement of towers. And it was the old A&N thing. If you were on the course, you got a solid tone. If you were on one side, you got the letter A, on the other side, the letter N. And so they had a spare teletype, and all of us, all 9 of us, had a chance to type on the teletype. And that's when I got impressed about the teletype, and that was 80 years ago. In 1953, I got a patent on a variable bandwidth crystal filter involving 2 pairs of crystals, one for the Mach frequency, the other for the space frequency. In a simple capacitor, I could vary the bandwidth, the individual bandwidth for the Mach and space frequencies. And from a kilohertz, once I worked a Canadian ham, would get reducing the bandwidth, the spacing of the Mach and space. We got down to below 60 hertz, and it's still printed. Unfortunately, I never wrote it up, but there was something afterwards I should have written it up, because at the time people were sending it 850 and 170. But it would have been interesting if we would close up even more. It sounded no longer like the normal RTTY. It was just like the thing quivering a little bit. It was really strange. And this part isn't exactly related to teletype, but after the TOR, Tango Oscar Romeo modes came out, PAC TOR, G TOR, and ACTOR, BACTOR, one other one, AMTOR. G, Golf TOR, was not popular because it was proprietary with the company that made the software. The G stands for Marcel Golay. Now, how do I know that? In 1943, Marcel Golay was the chief scientist at the Fort Monmouth Signal Corps Laboratories, and I worked for him. I was assigned to him for 3 months. The industry had a problem with making crystals. They had activity dips. Military crystals had to operate over minus 40 to plus 70 degrees C. And there would be a point where the activity dip would happen, and it kills the oscillation. So he suggested what he wanted to have was the ability to see the resonance of a crystal when you drove the crystal with a signal generator. At the time, the oscilloscopes were limited to 100 kilocycles, and we were interested in the range of 2 to 20 megahertz. So he suggested translating the frequency down into the, with a mixer, down into the range of an oscilloscope. So I built this setup, and then he had me make some measurements varying the temperature, and then we could actually see this the second response of the crystal moving with temperature, and as it coincided with the main response, that there was that's where they did occurred. Those crystals were all either square or rectangle, and because of that, the change was made to make crystals round. I think last time I spoke, I showed some crystals, if you recall. They were all rounded. But it was, again, a strange thing that, and this doesn't exactly apply to teletype either, although one of the things I did, I wrote a paper, I made some measurements of AMTOR, PACTOR, and some of the other modes that were coming out, as far as the speed having perfect signals. In other words, I generated the audio tones on this setup and ran it in and had a stopwatch and made some tests. I wrote up the report, submitted it to QST, who accepted it, and after a couple of months or 3 months, I called the editor and asked when it was going to be published. And after a few back and forths, each time getting a little hotter, he said, "Would you like to withdraw it?" And I did. You may notice, or maybe not, since that date, which is around 1995, nothing has ever been published with the call sign W2PAT in QST. Nancy, one time I've been donating to some fund at ARL each spring. So I was talking to the woman. I mentioned how old I was, and she thought it was of interest, so she wanted a picture of me at the equipment. Nancy sent it to QST, but it never was published. So I think they have a blacklist. Okay. Now here's another coincidence. How many of you know Alpha Foxtrot, Alpha 4, Quebec, Mike, Norm, Alabama? He's been a TRR net. By the way, how many are familiar with the TRR net? Come back. We're down to Dick Lambertson, QG, Norm, QM, Vic, he's here, Charlie, when he feels like it, It's all we have left. When I first moved down to South Carolina from Jersey, it would be 6 years this Labor Day. 7? How time has passed. I happened to have a log. I kept a log of what all the, and in the 1 month that I became active in prosperity, and not really Saluda County, there were 24 members in Air Force and 3 Army. They sort of just evaporated. Somehow, well, at one time, Chief Mars issued a bulletin. Are you, any of you familiar with that? Was it a monthly bulletin or information? Was it monthly?
It was weekly back then.
Yeah.
The air broadcast.
It was a printed one that was, I believe, mailed out.
Yeah, that was either monthly or quarterly.
Huh?
Monthly or quarterly.
Okay. Probably in that. There was a teletype net in a network called the Tornado Alley. Anyone familiar with that? Okay. In after 30 years with the government, I took a hiatus for a year and a half. Couldn't stand it. When I retired from the Fort, I was 56, a long time ago. I thought I would like something different, so I watched the want ads in a company called Hecon. I didn't know anything about it. Electronics, wanted an electronic technician, so I applied for the job. And the floor manager needed someone to assemble printers. These are strange printers, you know, they have scales that trucks drive on and drive off, platform scales, I think they're called. And they had 60% of the number of scale printers, and the cost was $1,500, and they were expensive because we're talking about 1973 to 84. So I was hired, and it was kind of fun for a while. You go to the stock room, you get a box of parts, you take it back to the bench, put it all together, run the tests, and I learned a lot because some of them didn't work, so you had to troubleshoot. So anyway, they were doing some things that seemed stupid to me, and I made some suggestions, and I was hired by the engineering manager. So I moved from one building to another. 1975, the engineering manager came out and said, "You guys better buy a computer. We're going to start using software instead of hardware for the scale printers." So there's a magazine called Byte. I don't know how many remember that. On the back pages was a company called Ohio Scientific, 6502 processor, 4K of RAM, one meg clock, really advanced. So I bought that one, and got some knowledge running the software. There was no DOS in those days. Ohio Scientific had basic and problems in their unit, unlike Radio Shack, who had the TRS-80, where you had to load the basic program if you want to. But anyway, someone, and I think it was in one of the chief's bulletins, mentioned that there was a need for a replacement for the teletype machines. They were old and wearing out finally. So I got to know this is several years later now, from 1973, 76, I guess it was. Joe Rosland was the programmer, A2HFW, and I said to him, could you program an ASCII to auto code converter? And he says, oh, that's easy. He says, make a couple of lookup tables, switch it back and forth. And so he gave me a list of the processor, a latch, and a couple of NAND gates, a couple of transistors. And so I put the board together, and he wrote the program, and we went back and forth a few times to get some bugs out. And I must have put an article in that chief's bulletin because I sold a total of 250 sets of the chips. And the fellow, AFA4DA, I think it's called, sign, was in Chicago, made the board. And Norm got one of those kits. Anyway, now let me talk about my health. It's strange. There's a point where, for somehow, the upstairs is pretty good, but the rest of the body's falling apart. I can remember things going way back, and Nancy or someone would say something about something, and I got a story. I want to thank two people, Bruce for taking the effort of looking at my 1951 license. You remember, I think you saw it when we went up in Tennessee, the air base up there. Asked for a fax. Nancy made the fax. And then, of course, this gentleman over here, who was instrumental in making my 100th birthday the most outstanding thing you could imagine. First, and Bruce was there, this gentleman was there taking pictures. A lot of people showed up. Something between 50 and 60, I think, was the number. Let me step back a bit. My wife died 9 years.
It'll be 10 years January.
And then my older son was born in... Oh, I got to stay away from that thing. Talks back to me.
Like I used
they came up for my 94th birthday up to Jersey, right? So after they left, well, my other daughter is Bradenton, South Florida, with an extended family. On my 100th birthday, there were 5 generations in the house, all the way from me to a 3-year-old.
Great-great-granddaughter.
Have I bored you?
No.
Oh, see, I got sidetracked. I can get rid of this now. So after they left, the house was, vacant, and the neighbors up in Jersey, nobody really pays attention to anyone. So I called up and said, I'm moving down to South Carolina, find me a couple of acres of land with a small house on it. Well, she found a little over 4 acres of land with a barn on it, and the house is 2,800 square feet. I've upgraded the house quite a bit. It's now got a full 16 kilowatt Generac on the property. I upgraded the heat pump, which failed after a few years, to a geothermal system. It's 3,000 feet of water pipe in the ground down 6 feet. It was strange. You hear these people, these workers in the trench putting the plastic pipe together. You hear the voices, you don't see anybody. And that's great. My heating bill, the 3 coldest months were $90-some for 2 of the months and $120 for the coldest month to heat the house, and it's 2,800 feet. And I had to put a new roof on. And I used to have a garden. Oh, by the way, on my health, starting with the Victory Gardens of 1943, I had a garden and even started a garden in South Carolina, but the soil was so bad it didn't work out very well. And that happened. Well, on my health, let me finish. I may have already told you that at 90 I had colon cancer. And during the operation, I had a heart attack. I recovered, and I subscribed to 4 health letters: Harvard, Cleveland, a couple more that I've forgotten. I've always read a lot, and between reading the health things, I no longer eat, and haven't since the operation, red meat, sausage, hamburger. I eat only fat-free chicken and turkey, fish, of course, and some vegetables. Since the operation, I had 1 siege of vertigo. We couldn't find anything wrong. Nancy panicked and took me to the hospital. And then I got a funny disease, whooping cough. Turns out it's a bacterial disease. It's not a virus. But it gave me a shot of antibiotic and got over the whooping cough. And that's been my health. And like I say, and it's pretty obvious, I guess, that the brain's working pretty well, but nothing else is. And I thank you for your
Marvin,
attention.
tell them about the leg lifts.
Oh, yeah. I've been, since the operation, I was concerned that I would not be able to walk. Because if you don't know it, I live by myself. I drive about 15 miles to Walmart. I walk in Walmart, obviously, the shop. And I started doing leg lifts. I wake up in the morning and I lift my legs up. I can't get them up very high to begin with, but I'm now up to 250 on each leg. And a curious thing, when I get up in the morning, before I do anything, I have backache. By the time I get through the leg lifts, I don't have a backache anymore. So, take it for what it's worth. Any questions? Yes, please.
I think you were going to say something about your son.
Yeah, pardon me.
I think you were going to say something about your son.
The other thing that's gone is my hearing aids.
Well, it's going to, so I understand.
Dad, remember you were talking about losing Mom, and then you were going to say something about Skippy. We lost Skippy 13 months later, your oldest son.
No, I can't hear you either.
He had a bad, see what happened, let me tell you.
Oh, yeah.
January of 07, we lost Mom, about a week. And then February of...
Nancy, you got to stand here.
Sorry. Okay. You don't think my mouth's big enough? Okay. Anyways, so we lost Mommy. It'll be 10 years January. Skippy passed away, my oldest brother, 13 months later. But in between that, they lost the family dog, Henry. So that's when Daddy was saying after his 94th birthday, it was like he couldn't stand being in that house alone anymore. And believe it or not, he calls and says, I'm moving to South Carolina. I was like, really? Because Judy and I would worry and we'd panic. And he was driving to Florida in my house in his early 90s from Jersey on the interstates, traveling 80 and telling me, I'm comfortable. This is a good zone, you know. And she and I are having panic attacks. So he called after his birthday in June. By August 17th that summer, I was closing on the house for him. And we moved him in that September. It happened that quick. And he's only 10 minutes from me drive.
Awesome.
So, yeah. And he's got great neighbors. South Carolina is such a friendly state. You know, it's so different from Jersey. You know. Was that everything, Daddy?
I think
Okay, I think we need to unhook. Yeah.
I'm through.